Hi guys, this is Dr. Gonzalez, and this video is about sampling, and I'm going to specifically refer to how we can make this relevant to our experimental designs. So let's get into the topic at hand. Just remember that when you're dealing with sampling, you're dealing with a subset of your population. So you have a population of interest, you're going to do sampling techniques that produce a sample that are going to then allow you to make an inference about that original population. So you need to know the difference between what is known as a biased and an unbiased sample. So a biased sample is simply unrepresentative. That means that some members of your population had a higher chance of being included in your sampling method. An unbiased sample is going to be representative, and that means that every member of that population had an equal probability of being included. And so it really represents the population that you're dealing with. Sampling is the process that you're going to use to select the people who are going to participate in your study or experiment. Remember, the goal of our experiments and our studies is often to make generalizations about that larger population based on a smaller sample or subset of the population. You've got to remember external validity. External validity is, do my results generalize to other populations beyond my study sample? So you want to keep that in mind when you're talking about sampling or your sampling technique. Remember the difference between a population, a sample, and a census. The population of interest is the entire set of individuals that you're interested in studying. Your sample is a smaller subset of that population, and they're the ones that are going to actually participate in your experiment or study. And a census would be when you collect data from every member of the population. Now, we do this when we count the number of people in the United States through the census, but it's really rare to see these in psychological research because it's very expensive and practically impossible to survey every member of the population. So when are you going to find that your sample is biased? So remember, a biased sample doesn't accurately reflect your population. A representative sample does. The people in your sample that you have pulled out are going to match the population of interest based on certain relevant characteristics. So whenever you run into biased sampling methods, you're automatically going to have a threat to external validity. Two biased sample techniques include what's called convenient sampling and self-selection. So how are we going to sample to prevent bias? The first technique we're going to talk about is called simple random sampling. And this is when every member of that population has an equal chance of being selected. It's going to require what's called a sampling frame, and that's a complete list of the entire population. You need that list to make sure every person is included in your sampling action. So here's an example. You have a random number generator that's used to select 100 students from a university directory. That would give you a simple random sample. A systematic sample is going to be obtained through systematic sampling. You're going to select two random numbers. Sampling is going to start with a person from the population of interest who corresponds to that first number, and that second number is going to be used to select your subsequent participants. So numbers are going to be selected using that random number table or a computer, because tables like the old school way is not really how we do things these days. In cluster sampling, I'm going to divide my population into groups called clusters. Some clusters are then going to be randomly selected. Now, all individuals in that cluster are going to be part of that sample. And this ends up being really efficient when you have a population that is geographically spread out. And it's also useful when you don't have a complete list of all the individuals in the population available. Multi-stage sampling uses a combination of techniques. So I'm going to randomly select clusters, and then there are going to be individuals from those clusters that are also randomly selected. So in the image over here, I have the United States. I'm going to randomly select certain states, And then from those states, I'm going to randomly select people from certain counties. In a stratified random sample, the population is going to be divided into strata or groups using certain characteristics. So maybe we're talking about race or income. And then we're going to take a random sample from that strata. And this is a really useful way for you to ensure that certain groups that might normally be underrepresented, like minorities, are going to be adequately represented in your final sample. Oversampling happens when we intentionally overrepresent one or more groups to ensure sufficient sample size for your analysis. So your final results are going to be statistically adjusted to reflect your actual population. So you've got an example over here with your target population. We're going to oversample 6 Asian people instead of 3, and the survey is going to actually use only 3 of those to get its analysis done so that it accurately represents the original population. Systematic sampling uses a mathematical rule. Okay, so we have a queue of people, that's our participant pool, and every potential participant gets a number. And then every X'd person is selected. So maybe you're going to be every 3rd person pulled from a medical records database. That's systematic sampling. Now, there are several sampling techniques that do not use probability, and we could sometimes consider these to be biased. However, their use is going to be justified sometimes due to real-world situations that we encounter as researchers, and those situations happen to affect the availability of participants. Now, some of those non-probability techniques include convenience sampling, self-selection, purposive sampling, and snowball sampling, and quota sampling. I've been doing several videos today, so I'm getting a little tired. I apologize. Convenience sampling is when we select participants that are really easy to reach. So those of you who have participated in SONA before at the university, you were part of a convenience sample. You're university students attending classes either online or on campus, but the researchers have easy access to you. And when they make it a part of the program, like they do in 4370, the non-experimental course, when we attach that you can get points for class to it, it increases the probability that you're going to go and actually participate. And that leads us to self-selection. So in self-selection, individuals are going to volunteer to participate. And that leads sometimes to an overrepresentation of certain traits. So there are platforms online like MK Turk and Prolific. Prolific is the one that I'm the most used to. I've actually participated in a lot of research studies on Prolific. So we call those sites beer money sites because a lot of people go there to make extra spending money. They don't view that money as income per se. And that in and of itself is a form of self-selection. Those people might like to take surveys, and that is a characteristic that may correlate with other characteristics that might lead to your sample being biased in some way. In purposive sampling, your selection is intentionally going to be limited to certain types of people. Here's an example. Say I want to study a new smoking cessation program. Obviously, I'm only going to recruit from people who are smokers because that's the purpose of the program. So when the program has a purpose like that, we're going to use purposive sampling to get a representative sample of that population of interest. In snowball sampling, you take existing participants that then go out and help recruit other future participants. And this is very useful in certain situations when you've got hard to reach populations. Those populations might be hesitant to trust authority. There may be social reasons for that. So an example would be a study on homelessness. And maybe there are some participants that are currently in your study who can go back and recruit other people to be in the study. And because they have a rapport with that group, they're going to be more likely to trust their friend than you, the researcher. In quota sampling, you have a researcher that identifies a subset, and then they're going to use a non-random sampling method to fill that quota. The researcher might divide the participant pool into groups using some sort of selective criteria, and then a specific number of participants, or a quota, is selected using a non-random method. So maybe the researcher wants to ensure their sample represents an age distribution of the population. So they might divide it into 3 age groups, and they're going to put a cap on the quota of participants in those groups so that when one of them is filled, those participants there are locked and that's it. No more people are recruited in that particular quota into the study. That happens a lot of times on Prolific. You'll have a study that comes up, you'll go to take it, and then it'll say the number of people for this study has been reached. And there's an example showing you right here the symbols and the different age groups and the number they need in order to get 60 altogether. Sometimes researchers are going to be able to combine different sampling techniques and still have a representative sample. So as long as your random sampling techniques are used, you can supplement later on with a non-random technique. So my initial sample is going to come from a random sample. Then from that random sample, I might use multi-stage sampling or systematic sampling to get at what I need for my research project. Now, how do you know which sample method to pick? So you've got to take into consideration external validity. Remember, external validity is the ability for your study to generalize outside of your research parameters. It's not always going to be a priority. So in association claims, you can get to those with a non-random sample. Now, self-selected samples might have some of the same general opinions as the population, but that might not always be the most relevant, or it may be impossible to do. You as a researcher have to learn to live with a certain level of uncertainty when it comes to your sample. Now, size of your sample is something that does matter. A large sample is going to provide you with a large data set, and the amount of available data may influence what sort of statistical analysis you're able to do. But even when you have a large data set, it may not be representative of your actual population. So we're going to make sure that we use the margin of error when we're reporting our statistics to help ensure that our stats are accurate and precise. Now, frequency claims, they're going to use a probability sampling method. We're not worried about frequency claims in this experimental class. We are more concerned with random sampling and random assignment. And I didn't cover random assignment on a slide, but you need to take into consideration that random assignment means that once you've recruited people into your study, each participant has an equal chance of being assigned to any one of your treatment conditions. So they're recruited and they may be assigned to the placebo group. They may be assigned to level 1 of the treatment group. They may be assigned to level 2 of the treatment group. That random sampling there and random assignment help you meet the qualifications for having an experimental study. You need to be aware of how different sampling techniques affect that external validity, because using the correct sampling method is going to be critical to whether or not your research is going to be able to apply to other settings outside of your research project. That's the end of the sampling video here. Make sure you go back and check Canvas for this module's assignments, templates, and instructions. If you have any questions, please reach out to me, and I look forward to talking to you in the next video. Take care.